on the Middle East, Al Monitor's podcast on the big stories in the region. My name is Amber Zaman, and today we'll be looking at the watershed elections that are scheduled to be held in Turkey on May the 14th. The stakes have never been so high. Should President Recep Tayyip Erdogan prevail, many believe Turkey's descent into full-blown authoritarianism, if not dictatorship, will accelerate. But after more than 2 decades in power, Erdogan's reign is looking shakier than it's ever been. The massive earthquakes that shook the country last month are taking their toll. With us here today to discuss these developments is Cengiz Candar, one of Turkey's most prominent political commentators and the author of several best-selling books on the Middle East and the Kurds. So, dear Cengiz, it's so wonderful to have you with us here today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me.
So Erdogan made it official today. He basically said that the elections are going to be held on May 14th ahead of their scheduled June 18 date. So now the race starts in earnest. What do you expect to happen? Do you think that the opposition has a real chance of winning this time? And if so, why?
I expect that it will be an overwhelming victory for the opposition. If it's a big if still, if the elections will be done properly, because with Erdogan at the helm of Turkey, you can expect any nasty developments until the day of the election. So, but if we reach to the day of election, and although it wouldn't be truly a fair and free election, the result, whether we can reach the date of the election with the candidates running, the presidential candidate of the opposition is Kılıçdaroğlu, which was announced a couple of days ago, it will be an overwhelming victory for the opposition. I have no qualms about it. I have no any doubts about it, and I think many polls will come out surprisingly wrong with the election results. But why I make this remark? It's not a big question mark. Why? The answer is simple. The earthquake in Turkey, the apocalyptic, I would call it, the apocalyptic earthquake has been a game changer. Even if there would be no earthquake in Turkey in the magnitude that it had taken place, the territory it covered is as big as Portugal. The population inhabited the earthquake-stricken area is 14 million, much more than many of the Middle Eastern countries' populations. And the response of the government, the response of the regime was so slow and shamefully very negative, not only slow. The way they conducted the whole thing, with all the corruption, everything came into open, and it's strongly embedded in the subconscious of the people, the electorate. So even if there would be no earthquake in the magnitude that it has been, the race for the elections would be very tight, and probably would be to the favor of the opposition. But after this earthquake, I think, which I call it as game changer, it will be an absolutely big defeat for the regime.
So what do you say to the counter argument that precisely in times like this of a national disaster, people tend to rally around the state, around what's familiar, and also the fact that in some ways the government's narrative about this being an act of God and destiny is somehow resonating, particularly among the more conservative elements of the areas that were affected, principally places like Adıyaman, where the tarikats are very influential, Kahramanmaraş. What do you say to that?
Many people in the world, especially the international media, as much as many governments seem to get used to have the omnipotent Mr. Erdogan as the president of Turkey, and they never think that he might be changed. But he will be changed, and he will be changed through the ballot box, as what had happened in Brazil and elsewhere. So you cannot rule out that the current autocrats cannot be defeated by the ballot box. And Turkey will be a very important turning point in that respect, going far behind what the Brazil elections demonstrated. But coming back to your question, the earthquake, when I speak of it as the game changer, that it revealed so many things. It revealed the corruption, first of all, because the present regime in Turkey, as a constituency, in terms of its capital and its the vision of the development, relied upon construction sector mainly. And from the day they have been in power at the turn of the century, they whipped up the construction sector, and the opposition candidate Kılıçdaroğlu, when he was speaking of $418 billion stolen from the people, with what he called as the Gang of Five, meaning the construction magnates around Erdogan. And this construction element in the Turkish economy, which has a very clear the image of Turkish corruption, which according to Transparency International, Turkey is 109th in terms of the corruption, which is very, very high. So with this the earthquake, the consequences of the corruption in the construction sector is displayed so openly. It's in the minds of the in the eye, in front of the eyes of the people. So referring to God does not help. And
I mean, Turkish people have been witnessing corruption from, from time immemorial. I mean, and they don't seem to react to it very much, that I've observed as a journalist for all these years. Do you really think that, I mean, why is Erdogan even still in power if corruption is such a big deal for Turkish people?
But we didn't have this natural disaster of this magnitude, which made corruption is an important issue for the lives of the people. Now, the official figure, as we are having this conversation right now, is 48,000 people perished, and it most probably it's around 100,000. But one thing is very clear, and it's World Bank figures, that the financial cost of this earthquake is $100 billion, which is added to the already ongoing deep economic and financial crisis Turkey has been witnessing. So when all these elements come together, then the corruption that the Turkish population didn't pay much attention in making their political choices, all of a sudden becomes a very, very important issue, shaping up their political choices when they are asked. And they will be asked in 2 months' time, May 14th. And if we recall another devastating earthquake, although it was not as big as the magnitude of this one at the end of the last century in the year 1999, if we remember the result, and it was again an economic the dire straits that Turkey had been facing, and the consequence of that earthquake, which was followed by an election only after 3 years, ended up Mr. Erdogan's party is coming to power with parliamentary majority, and the wiping out of 3 parties who were in government from the parliament. So if we just recall this and project it to the upcoming elections, I think we can come to a conclusion why an overwhelming majority for the opposition is expected.
You say that, and it's true, but let's not forget that Erdogan was an incredibly compelling candidate. And, whatever we may think of him, he truly is one of the most remarkable politicians Turkey has seen in its modern history, one of the most gifted, one of the most charismatic, and he still retains some of that, even after all these long years and after being, facing so many challenges. And before him now is Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, who many people tend to think is rather colorless, uncharismatic, mild-mannered, and isn't really fit to run against this firebrand. What do you think of Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu as a candidate? And does it really matter who is running against Erdogan so much as presenting a united front, which again, the opposition wobbled quite a bit recently with Meral Akşener and her theatrics?
Well, I think this is the talk of some intellectuals in Turkey, just making a comparison between Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, which is not a very impressive figure, with the charismatic figure of Erdogan when both are compared. But it's true what you have said, that Erdogan is a very shrewd politician, and he has been a veteran statesman. As long as who is in power, as long as Putin is, it's nearly 2 decades now he's in power. Everybody around the globe memorized his name, and but there is a feeling which is, I think, predominant in Turkey nowadays, is enough is enough, because this man, with all his charisma and shrewdness and cunningness and strong leadership capacities, led Turkey into a disaster economically, foreign policy-wide. He polarized the country. If there would be some common sense among the people, Turkey is very close for a civil war in terms of the polarization he pumped into the society. And it's an ailing economy under Erdogan. And why should the Turkish people look at him and compare with the unimpressive Kılıçdaroğlu and opt for somebody who is running the country since 2 decades, and the country is on the brink of a total collapse? And one thing to the favor of Kılıçdaroğlu, I should say that he has the chance of winning because he's just the opposite of Erdogan. He's being unimpressive is to his favor, actually.
Well, also the man is, as far as I know, and I've been following him very closely all these years, is, squeaky clean. There is nothing that they found on him in terms of corruption. He leads a very modest life. I've been to his home in Ankara, had tea with his wife in their kitchen, and everything was old, the fridge, the stove.
And I should add one more thing, what you have said, that I think that he is underestimated in the sense that he patched up this coalition of 6 parties. And in Turkey, when in the Turkish political culture, compromise and concession are synonymous as treason and sellout. So we don't this in the Turkish political culture, this tradition of constructing coalitions and keeping them. So
I totally agree with you, and I think people have been underestimating him from day one. The guy managed to survive at the helm of this very fractious party that's full of intrigue, and people were trying to trip him up at every turn. In this latest episode, we just saw how strong and steady he stood and called Akşener's bluff. Beneath that mild demeanor, I believe, rests a very strong-willed, determined man. So I tend to agree with you, Cengiz, on that. But let's turn now to the real kingmakers of this election, because, Akşener could have kind of been something of that nature if she'd played her cards well, but she didn't. So really, the Kurds remain the main kingmakers in this election. What do you predict they will do? Are they going to back Kılıçdaroğlu? And do you think that they'll field their own candidate in the hope of having a runoff in which then they'll have even greater leverage, bargaining power, or will they just say, hey, we got to sew this up in the first round?
Well, the Kurds, in terms of their political representation, is the most suave and the most politicized segment of the Turkish political spectrum. And very recently also, they proved to be very realistic, very flexible, very perceptive in their attitude vis-a-vis the presidential election and general elections. If we take the statements of two people who might be representative, how Kurds would be acting. One is the former co-chair of the HDP, the pro-Kurdish party, who is in prison, Selahattin Demirtas, and the current co-chair, Mithat Sancar. In the course of the last few days, they made very strong statements with very strong implications that they might be supporting Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu for presidency, and they would not feel their own candidate, and even they are so seemingly energetic to mobilize the electorate to get Kılıçdaroğlu elected in the first round, so not to let the presidential election to be tested for a second round. And the Kurdish vote was decisive in the Istanbul municipal elections, local elections in the year 2019, and even the Erdogan and the people in power tried to enlist Öcalan to their side, but nevertheless, Selahattin Demirtaş's message and the perception of the Kurdish electors in Istanbul, which is a fairly high number, which could be decisive for anybody running
it's
against
the world's
Erdogan's
largest Kurdish city, right?
candidate.
Istanbul, the world's largest Kurdish city.
Yeah, 2 million Kurds. So the same ratio, if we project into Turkey, makes Kurds a very decisive element for the fate of the elections. And until now, the Kurds proved themselves to be a very strong constituency, which goes to the direction their leadership asks them to do. And their leadership, if we accept Demirtas, and to a certain extent formally the co-chair of the HDP, they are very, very overtly supportive of Kılıçdaroğlu, and they went to the extra length, saying that they are not making any bargaining and they are not asking for any ministerial posts, even if the opposition wins the elections. They just underline that they are for a common ground regarding the promotion of human rights, democratic rights, and liberties. And Kılıçdaroğlu also responded to them favorably. And one thing we have to take into mind, that at the end of the day, Kurds' political position is a reflection of their identity. And we should now take into consideration that Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu is ethnically a Kurd. So, and he's very aware of
broadcast that.
And Kurds are aware of it also.
Yeah, it's so Erdogan is, as we
wisely he doesn't broadcast this much.
Yeah, well, yeah. Though I did get him to say he's an Alevi when I was working for Habertürk. In fact,
But he's
that was
also
headline.
Ethnic Kurd.
Well, he didn't say Kurd, but he said, yes, I'm an Alevi, and so what? Indeed, so what?
He's from Dersim. Dersim is a very special symbolic element in the Kurdish.
Oh yeah,
psyche.
Question. And he's from a family of sheikhs, of peers. He's a spiritual, very big, the Qurayshan tribe. So Erdogan, the brilliant strategist, and sometimes not so brilliant strategist, do you think he can do a big U-turn and sort of pull out Öcalan from his isolation, promise him the moon, and then get Öcalan to lead his flock towards the AKP? I don't think so. What do you think?
Well, he has to, well, on his flank, when we speak of Erdogan, we also imply that there is some elements of the Turkish nationalist deep state, plus the traditional extremist, racist even, with racist undertones, the nationalists of Devlet Bahçeli, and also some elements who are represented of the deep state by the name Doğu Perinçek. And these figures made very clear statements offending the PKK, Öcalan, and the Kurds in general. So I wonder how Erdogan would that extra mile while keeping his allies on board. That's
Well,
a
it's
big
quite
question.
mystifying, though, that
But given given an Erdogan in terms of pragmatism, some frontier without any frontiers, it is not unplausible totally what you
okay.
have said.
But I mean, what seems odd to me is that he would even still stick with Bahçeli, who's just melting, isn't he? I mean, his poll numbers are just dropping.
Yes.
What use is he ultimately to Erdogan?
But it's a coalition of nationalists, the Erdogan's power. And when I spoke of the state or deep state, it's not that much deep anymore. The Turkish state and the deep state we
It's the
use.
shallow state.
Yeah, it's very close to each other, the layers now. But
Okay.
that's the nationalist, the bureaucratic security structure of the Turkish state, which is very anti-Öcalan and anti-PKK. And they are the main allies of Erdogan as well. So it's not only a matter of how many votes MHP may get, whether it's melting or not. It's the structure of the regime, whether they will let Erdogan to take such a dramatic step. It is not totally out of question. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't expect that move from Erdogan. He can do that, but he did a similar move, not at the same level that you are bringing it up during the 2019, during the local elections in Istanbul. It didn't work. So
No.
Öcalan was the golden bullet. Unless he sets free Öcalan in 2 months' time, that golden bullet is
It's a
for him.
bit difficult, I think, for him to do that. And if anything, Öcalan is in total isolation right now. Nobody's had any contact with him for years, literally. It's of course under international law, it's a huge violation, but that's a whole different topic. Final question: if he doesn't, free Öcalan, he could also do the opposite. He could invade Syria again. And do you think that's likely?
To expect an operation in that sense, while he was very much criticized not letting the Turkish armed forces to be involved in the rescue operations in the regions adjacent to Syria during the earthquake, and now sending the army into Syria, it's too obvious that it's a very dirty game to get some votes. So he's exposed. He's late for doing that, and he's too much exposed for this tactic, and it won't work. It won't bring the votes for him.
But then there's of course the Putin factor, and we know that in some respects Putin almost links his own survival to that of Erdogan, and he obviously really wants Erdogan to carry on. So they could yet cook up something in Syria, no?
Possible, but it's very speculative, and the time is very short. The elections will be in 2 months' time, and but you can reverse the question. Also, Erdogan needs Putin for his survival, and Putin is a difficult position. He couldn't get over even the Bakhmut front in Ukraine. So both autocrats are in an unenviable situation, both of them.
Well, on that hopeful note, dear Cengiz, we'll end this conversation, though I'm sure we'll be having many more in private and on the air. So talk to you soon, Cengiz. Thanks for coming on our program.
I thank you, hopefully.
And this brings us to the end of another episode of On the Middle East. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Cengiz. Thank you and goodbye.